Europe crossed the Atlantic expecting colonies. Instead, it found empires, confederacies, and coastlines it could visit, but never keep. That is the world we are stepping into. Not a world where Europe never arrives, not a frozen pre-contact paradise. A world where ships still appear, trade still begins, horses and guns still cross the ocean. But the one thing Europe never manages to build is a permanent settler society strong enough to claim the continents for itself. The real historical barrier to this timeline was disease. After 1492, indigenous populations across the Americas fell by roughly 50 to 95% by 1650. And on many Caribbean islands, the collapse was even worse. Whole societies were shattered before they could fully respond. So for this timeline to work, one thing has to change. The epidemics still come, but they hit later, less uniformly, or spread unevenly enough that the continents are wounded, not broken. And that gives indigenous nations something they rarely had in our history: time. Time to adapt, time to trade, time to unify, time to decide that Europe can dock, bargain, and trade, but not stay. In our timeline, European settlement succeeded not just because of ships, steel, or gunpowder. It succeeded because disease often arrived first and tore societies apart before many could react. And because Europeans repeatedly exploited local rivalries, civil wars, and desperate alliances. Cortés did not conquer Tenochtitlan with a handful of Spaniards alone. He had major indigenous allies, and smallpox hit at exactly the wrong moment for the Mexica. In the Andes, the death of Huayna Capac, likely from a European epidemic, helped trigger the succession crisis that weakened the Inca world before Pizarro arrived. Now imagine those disasters do not line up so perfectly. The death toll is still horrific, but civilizations are not decapitated before they can respond. The Mexica do not face Spaniards' internal enemies and epidemic collapse all at once. The Inca do not meet invaders in the middle of a succession war. In the Northeast, powers like the Haudenosaunee learn to weaponize diplomacy and turn European rivalry into leverage. Along the Chesapeake, leaders like Powhatan prove that early settlements can be starved, isolated, and broken before they become permanent footholds. That becomes the turning point of the whole timeline. Europe is not blocked from contact, it is blocked from permanence. No giant settler republics, no continent-wide plantation empires, no endless inland march of farms, forts, and family migration. Just a hard rule enforced by many different peoples in many different ways. You may trade here. You may not settle here. The first result is simple. The major political traditions of the Americas survive, not unchanged, not untouched, but alive. In the Northeast, confederacies like the Haudenosaunee become even more important, turning Atlantic rivalry into diplomatic leverage instead of a prelude to dispossession. In Mesoamerica, Mexico-centered power does not collapse all at once, but survives long enough to reorganize into successor states or federations. In the Andes, Inca state traditions reorganize and modernize instead of dissolving into Spanish viceroyalties. The continents do not stay pre-contact, they stay politically their own. Europe no longer finds a hemisphere waiting to be renamed, it finds one that insists on speaking back. And this part matters. Europe still changes the continents. The Columbian exchange still happens. Horses spread, firearms spread, metal tools spread, new crops and animals transform local economies. What changes is who controls the consequences. In our real timeline, Plains peoples quickly combined horses and guns to their advantage, using them to reshape mobility, trade, hunting, and war. That matters because it shows the key principle of this timeline. Indigenous societies were absolutely capable of absorbing Eurasian technologies and turning them to their own purposes. So in this world, coastal trade ports appear. But under indigenous law, indigenous taxation, and indigenous military oversight, Europe still transforms the Americas. It just never gets to rule them. And this is where the episode becomes bigger than just the Americas, because if there are no giant settler colonies, there is no United States as we know it, no Canada as we know it, no vast Spanish or Portuguese America in the form we recognize. Instead, the Atlantic becomes a crowded world of indigenous states, confederacies, trade federations, and coastal enclaves where Europeans are present, but never sovereign. Imagine maps that look almost alien to us. Nahuatl-speaking successor states in central Mexico, Quechua and Aymara-led power centers in the Andes, Haudenosaunee influenced confederations across the Great Lakes and Northeast. Powerful Plains confederacies transformed by horses and firearms. Maritime states on the northwest coast. The Americas do not vanish from world history. They become one of its main power centers on their own terms. Now comes the harder truth. A continent saved from settler colonialism is not a continent saved from politics. If Europe never takes the Americas, that does not mean the Americas become peaceful. It means indigenous powers have more room to become powers, and powers compete. The Mexico world already relied on tribute, hierarchy, and resentful rivals. Cortés succeeded in part because enemies of Mexican domination chose alliance over submission. The same lesson applies across the hemisphere. Preventing European conquest does not erase internal inequality, strategic ambition, or regional empire building. So, yes, the Americas might be freer from Europe, but they would not be free from empire. The second problem is obvious the moment you think about it. Europe does not just shrug and sail away forever. A hemisphere this rich, this large, and this strategically important remains the obsession of every Atlantic power. So if colonization fails, Europe shifts tactics. More coastal pressure, more missionaries, more blockades, more proxy wars, more weapons trading, more attempts to find one indigenous rival strong enough or desperate enough to break the balance. And we know this logic is real because the Haudenosaunee already played major European powers against one another in the French-British rivalry. In this alternate world, that pattern does not disappear. It becomes the long-term structure of Atlantic politics. Europe still reaches America. It just spends centuries trying to get around the fact that it cannot settle it. This is the biggest twist of the whole episode. A lot of people imagine a non-colonized America as a preserved wilderness. That is not the strongest version of this timeline. The stronger version is a continent that modernizes on different terms, with indigenous-led states, indigenous trade routes, and indigenous centers of power. Urbanization likely still happens. Industrialization likely still happens. Mass politics, rail, electricity, print culture, bureaucracy, diplomacy, and modern armies likely still happen too. Just not under permanent European demographic and legal supremacy. The real question is not whether the Americas modernize. It is whose modernity wins. And that means the Americas of today would likely be less familiar to us than almost any other what-if scenario we can imagine. Different state names, different capitals, different major languages, different religions, different legal systems, different ideas of land, sovereignty, and citizenship. The continents do not remain outside history. They build a different version of it. So what would the Americas look like today if indigenous nations had stopped permanent European settlement? Not empty, not ancient, not untouched. They would likely be less European, more indigenous, and far more politically unrecognizable to us. A hemisphere of indigenous-led states and confederations, some democratic, some imperial, some mercantile, some militarized, some outward-looking and maritime, some continental and land-based. Europe would still matter. Its goods would still matter, its technologies, religions, and markets would still matter, but Europe would not get to become the demographic and political owner of the continents. The real historical Americas were shaped not just by contact, but by catastrophic population loss and the transformation of coastal footholds into expanding settler empires. Remove that final step and the entire Atlantic world changes. A child in central Mexico might grow up speaking Nahuatl in a modern industrial state, learning European history as foreign history, not as the story that founded their country. So the final answer is not, the Americas would stay the same, or Europe would never matter. It is something much bigger. The Americas would trade, fight, industrialize, centralize, break apart, unify, rise, fall. Just under very different flags, Europe would still reach America. It just would not get to become America. And maybe that is the real power of this question. The continents would not remain outside modernity. They would build a different modern world, one in which the Atlantic is no longer the story of Europe spreading west, but of Europe meeting a hemisphere it could never quite conquer. So what do you think? If indigenous nations had stopped permanent European settlement, would the Americas today be more stable, or just powerful in completely different, unfamiliar ways? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and tell me, what if should we tackle next?